I have a secret that I need to admit. I have been struggling so much with my landscape photography over the past week. Now, you have seen the past 2 videos I've been out photographing in these beautiful snowy conditions that we have here in Denmark. They are absolutely amazing, impressive. I have rarely seen anything like this in my home country. But despite this being my 5th or 6th outing in these conditions, I gotta admit, I have been just, I won't say frustrated, but surprised about how insanely hard it is to work in these conditions. Because generally, when you get a fully snowy landscape, you lose a lot of the details in the landscape. That is good. However, those details that are usually left are often the details that are super distracting. So I've come down to one of my favorite locations here in Denmark, and as you can see, I'm photographing out over this little hill, and then I have this forest down here and some foreground trees. And I have a composition something like this right here, and as you can see, I'm using the intervalometer to just keep taking photos while I'm flying the drone and talking to you guys. However, in the snow, it is just full of grassy spots that are coming out of the snow, even though the snow is actually quite deep. Now, I've had this photo in mind for a long while. I really wanted a winter version of this specific scene. But as I've also visited this place a couple of days ago and also today, I am starting to realize that I probably would prefer this shot here with hoarfrost and not snow, just hoarfrost. And then with a little bit of fog there in the foreground among the trees, and then a somewhat clear sky. It's not too much to ask for. The point is that all this snow is not necessarily super beneficial for a lot of the locations that I have been photographing over the years, a lot of the locations that I've been researching. Even though I have been somewhat successful with some of my photos, got some of what I want, as you could see in last week's video, I haven't actually been as efficient as I would think. Another example is also from last week's video, where I went to those 2 hills and photographed the tower with the sunrise behind it. Beautiful shot, I'm so happy about it. But the conditions were incredibly beautiful, but I only came away with 1 photo that I was happy about. And that is quite uncommon for me and how I work. I always say, at least I came away with something. I guess it's just how it is with these snowy conditions. But it does surprise me how inefficient it is. So there are a few different things I do to counter this and trying to optimize my chance of success. So first and foremost, and I would say this one thing here is the most important landscape photography tip that I can give you, despite obviously learning all the basics, like knowing how to shoot with your camera and so forth. But that is to research and also be able to pre-visualize. The combination of those two, but especially research. Go and explore your home country, wherever you're shooting the most, where you want to photograph. It can, of course, be hard to just go and research a whole lot of stuff if you are traveling from Europe to the US. However, in your local area, it's quite easy. Go and research, get to know your locations and be able to get a somewhat idea about what you can expect during certain conditions. Another benefit of this is that depending on how the conditions are in the morning before you drive out, you should have a pretty good idea about your local area. Should you go north, should you go south, west, east, depending on the conditions. And then you have a lot of different interesting locations that you can go to and photograph. And you don't necessarily need to go to those locations to get a very specific composition. You can also go to areas that are of potential. A lot of my personal favorite photos occur when I have one photo, one idea in mind. I go for that, and then I get a whole lot of other photos. And those photos then become some of my favorite photos. So you can actually see here I have my own personal map of Denmark, and there are a few spots in there. But as you can see, I have done a whole lot of research, but also just placed a lot of locations that may be of interest. Now I'm quite a slob that I'm only basically using the blue pointer, but at the very least I have a map of potential interesting locations, all locations where I exactly know the composition. Now another thing is simply just patience. Don't get frustrated. Well, you can get frustrated, but it doesn't help you a whole lot. And make sure that you just keep trying. Try and try and try again. As I said, I was here a few days ago. I got a few photos that were decent, but not something I made a video out of. I came here this morning and I've been standing on this hill photographing this composition for 45 minutes by now. The camera has just been running while I've been flying the drone and looking around. However, just right now, the fog is getting into a position that is actually quite interesting here in the background. So right now, how the fog is in the scene actually makes the layers stand out much more. So I may only need to take like one photo for the background, and then I will have another photo where there is some fog here in the foreground. And that's the third thing you can do to counter hard conditions. If you don't get optimal conditions for the specific scene you're photographing, you can do some time blending. Right now, because I've taken so many photos, I can choose the best background and the best foreground and simply just blend them together in Photoshop. And if you want to learn more about how I do that, be sure to enroll in my big Photoshop for landscape photographers post-processing course. There's a coupon code down in the description of the video, but it is in this course where I teach you all the different techniques I use, everything from dodging and burning over luminosity masking, how to clean up your photos properly, which is also relevant in these conditions, doing some advanced blending, countering wide angle distortion, focus stacking, and much more. In the course there are even 11 start to finish tutorials with various of my own favorite photos. As mentioned, there's a link down in the description with a coupon code to save a little bit of money. So before we just head on, be sure to also subscribe to my newsletter. That is my direct line to you guys out there. It is where I announce my workshops and I announce new products first, or give you any kind of news that I find relevant for you. So there's a link to my newsletter down in the description of this video. So I've come down to this swampy area and it looks beautiful. I was also down here a couple of days ago, and at that time I actually had sun coming straight at me. The sun would be like over there behind those trees. But I do think that I came away with some decent photos from this area, so I just want to go through them with you. Because what I did was that I put on my 16 to 35mm lens, and having the sun there in the background, and then using these small snowy mounds here as my foreground gives a lot of like dynamics to the scene. It looks quite cool if you take the wide angle and then go all the way down low and try to find some kind of pattern here in the foreground. It's very much about trying to find a balance in your photo and then try your very best to also find an interesting pattern. Now, if there is light on the foreground, I'm pretty sure I had my camera like right here. If there was light on this foreground, these snowy mountains and these patterns would look completely different. But as you can see, as I move the camera around here, all sorts of different interesting patterns come out. And once I've found my composition, this one here looks quite cool. I can put the camera a little bit up. And once I've found my composition, then I simply just focus on the foremost part of the scene, and then I focus stack it. With this camera, I'm so lucky that I can actually put it into focus bracketing, and that means that the camera itself, it will take all the photos that I need for the focus stack throughout the scene, and then I can put that together in Photoshop afterwards. The camera doesn't do the focus stack itself, it just takes the photos automatically for me. So as long as I have image stabilization on and I hold the camera somewhat still, I haven't had any issues focus stacking or shooting a focus bracket handheld and be able to put it together in Photoshop or whatever else focus stacking software you use afterwards. So as you can see in these photos, I made sure to use the sun star as my focal point, and then I made sure to have a somewhat equal distribution, visual distribution of the different mounts and elements in the foreground. And you should also be able to see that there was some kind of like leading lines and visual flow leading you into the background. And with the wide angle lens, a good sense of depth in the scene, because the foreground elements were large and the background elements were smaller. And if you want to learn much more about composition in landscape photography, be sure to get my 2 ebooks. Super easy to read, plenty of examples as to get to the point fast so you actually learn something. And in the last chapter, I summarize everything that I have covered in the ebook. There are links to both my first ebook and second ebook on composition in landscape photography down in the description of this video. So as you've also seen, I've managed to do a little bit of droning in this beautiful atmospheric conditions here. And I actually managed to find a little island that is located all the way here in the background. And photographing that from above straight down was actually quite cool. I think it gave some nice minimalist photos. And I also managed to photograph a big crack in the ice that's on top of the lake that I also find to be quite interesting. And as you can see with these photos here, it's simply just a question about putting my focal point or whatever it is I'm photographing straight there in the middle. If you want to learn how I edit my photos, if you want to learn how I compose my photos, there are links to my educational materials down in the description of this video. Be sure to also subscribe to my newsletter. That is where I have my direct contact with you guys. I will start heading home, so thank you for watching and see you next time.